Hey guys, my name is Michele. As you know, I'm a life coach and I help people that have been through complex PTSD or narcissistic abuse syndrome. And what I was talking about today was the fact that a lot of people that find themselves in relationships with somebody that's maybe emotionally toxic, when they look back at the patterns in their life, they realize that that wasn't the first time that they were in a relationship with someone like that. So there are two things that I've seen happen. I've seen people realize that they're in a relationship with a overt narcissist, and they break out of that relationship because it's destroying them, right? Only to find themselves in a relationship with a covert narcissist. Or I find people that had toxic relationships. Maybe they weren't necessarily with somebody that was high on the scale of NPD, but they were with people that were emotionally unavailable and people that took more than they gave, right? Or maybe they played games, manipulation games. And each relationship seemed to be a little bit worse than the last until finally, bam, they wind up with a covert or overt malignant narcissist. And then their eyes are open and they realize that there's actually a dynamic going on. So what I want to talk about today is why that happens. Why do people go from a bad relationship or an unkind, unloving relationship to little by little worse and worse relationships until they're with somebody that practically destroys them? And this is so important to understand because it's not just about spotting the other person as being toxic. It's not just about learning about the other person's behavior. If we don't know why we have been in so many different kinds of narcissistic relationships, whether they're with significant others or even friends, or sometimes we find ourselves recreating these dynamics in the workplace. And if we don't know why this is happening, then even if you clean up or detox people from your life at this moment, you'll run the risk of doing it again if you don't break the pattern. The first step in breaking the pattern is understanding it. So that's what we're going to do today. If you're wondering if you have fallen for someone or if you're in a pattern of falling for people that are emotionally unavailable, ask yourself if the people that you've been in relationships with in the past, if they tend to exhibit the following characteristics. So an extreme of mixed signals would be a malignant narcissist who love bombs and discards. But again, that's an extreme. There's a whole lot in between here. And if you're with somebody that maybe is really close to you one week, tends to respond to your texts, answers you back, is there for you, and then suddenly you feel like you're being ghosted the next week and you don't understand why, that behavior, if you see a pattern between that person, is a red flag of somebody that might be emotionally unavailable. If you've been in relationships with people that don't provide emotional support for you, so maybe you're there for them when they go through hard times, but it's almost like when you go through a hard time, you really have to do it all by yourself. Now, this can be kind of confusing because sometimes the person you're in the relationship with will say things like, of course I'm there for you. Of course I emotionally support you. I want to be there for you. But when it comes to emotionally unavailable people, you always have to put what they say and what they do side by side and see if it measures up. Because somebody that's emotionally unavailable will claim all these things that they do for you to support you, and yet when you try to think of something that they've actually done that's more than words, it's really difficult to come up with something. Number 3 is breadcrumbing. And again, there's two extremes of this. With a toxic person, if you've been with a malignant narcissist, when they're breadcrumbing, what they do is eventually the relationship is 98% emotional manipulation, emotional neglect, abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, and 2% where they let up. They let up of abuse, and that 2% is like a breadcrumb. It actually feels like they're tossing you something that makes you feel good. And because the abuse is so extreme, that 2% or that breadcrumb actually does feel good when you're in that situation. It's because you've gone without for so long that that breadcrumb feels like it's actually something. A lesser degree of that would be, let's say you're in a relationship with somebody that's emotionally unavailable, but you don't recognize it yet. And they're always making excuses of when or why they can't be with you. You know, maybe they have plans with other people and they're able to make those plans, but when it comes to making plans with you and sticking behind them, they don't. And so what happens is, after a certain point, you start to realize this doesn't feel good anymore, and you start to go the other direction, and then they toss you a breadcrumb where they want to hang out with you, or they'll accept your suggestion to hang out, and it just ropes you back in. So again, analyze if this is a characteristic that you see in a lot of your past relationships. It's their way or the highway. Okay, emotionally unavailable people despise compromise. They're very self-centered and expect you to revolve around them. So if you feel like you're always revolving around that person and all of your needs, all of the things that are important to you are constantly being swept under the rug, you definitely want to pay attention to that. You do all of the relationship work. In other words, if you were to look at your relationships and who puts what into it, right? Some people say it should be 50-50. Some people say it should be 100 and 100. Regardless, it should be reciprocal, right? And both parties should be working hard to maintain the relationship. But if you look back at your relationships and you feel like you're always trying harder and harder, and you're giving more and you're compromising more and you're forgiving more, then, and the other person is just still unpleasable and they're really not doing anything to make the relationship work, then that's a one-sided relationship, and obviously they're not emotionally invested in it. And the last point that you can use to self-reflect, and obviously this isn't an all-inclusive list, but these are some really good starting points that can help you to self-reflect and look at your relationships and see if they have these characteristics, if there's a pattern there, okay? And the last one is if they mirror you as opposed to just being their genuine, authentic self. So let's say you're talking to your significant other and you ask their opinion. And somehow, even though it seems like they care about what you think, right? But somehow they always switch it around and you're always the one that answers first. And everything that you say is exactly how they feel. It's almost like you're explaining what you like, right? And they're then conjuring up an exact replica of that. And they're mirroring you instead of just being their authentic self. I know in my face-to-face coaching, I get a lot of clients that wind up realizing that. You know, they'll tell me, Michele, but he or she was like the exact thing that I've always loved. And sometimes I'll ask them, I'll be like, well, were they like that before? If they knew the person, was that their personality before? And they literally pause and they're like, well, no. Actually, they completely changed right after we started dating and they were everything I wanted. And they start to see that, yes, they did become everything they wanted because they were mirroring back that person. So my point of that list is for you to examine if a lot of your relationships have those characteristics, then you might be in a pattern of falling for people that are emotionally unavailable. And I want to talk about why. I have a few different reasons. If I miss any, I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section below. One of the reasons is something called repetition compulsion. And what that basically means is that we have like this compulsion inside to repeat unhealed patterns. And the goal with repetition compulsion is that there's like a piece of us that's seeking to fix and heal it. So for example, Let's say we had a parent that was emotionally unavailable. And as a child, that is really hard. That's a very deep wound that leaves, right? So that child grows up, and on a subconscious level, not even intending to, they can gravitate to people that was very much like the person or the adult caregiver parent in that child's life that was emotionally unavailable. And that adult child of that emotional wound winds up trying to heal that wound through that person. They think, it's almost like they think, if I can get this person to love me, to give me the unconditional love that I deserve, then I can feel healed. Then I can feel enough. And this is something that takes place below our conscious awareness. So in order to change, right, the first step is starting to recognize if this is one of the reasons why we keep repeating these kinds of relationships. If we don't get to the root cause, we can detox every time we're in a toxic relationship, and we can get rid of toxic people every time we realize they're toxic, but we'll just keep finding ourselves with another toxic person until we do the inner work. So I'm going to go through a couple more reasons why this happens, and then I'll talk about some strategies on what you can do. Lately, I've been getting a lot of clients that didn't have toxic parents, and yet they have similar wounds to people that did. And some of their stories are that they had an absent parent. Maybe they were raised without a father, right? And maybe whether or not the father was toxic, who knows? Regardless, the father wasn't in their lives. So there's kind of a perception that children get. They see other children with fathers, they see that they don't have one. And even if their mother is healthy and treats them well, a child's perception can be, there's something wrong with me that I don't have a dad. You know, I wasn't enough to have both parents. And when children don't feel enough, sometimes they feel, or they get this perception. And whether or not it's true or not, that perception can guide their beliefs and, you know, their outlook on relationships. If they get the perception that they have to earn and they have to work hard to get somebody to love them and care about them because they had someone absent in their life, then they can wind up falling for people that they have to work hard to get their acceptance and appreciation, which are normally people that are emotionally unavailable. A third reason is maybe a person was brought up in a household where there was conditional love. Even if that parent wasn't necessarily high on the scale of NPD or any personality disorder, if they parented from a place where maybe they were parented from, which probably wasn't healthy to begin with, and now they're repeating the patterns that they had as a child. Maybe they were taught to reward the child only when they did something good, you know, only when they were having the parents' approval. And they didn't teach the child unconditional love, then that child grows up thinking that they have to earn love. Now here's the danger with this one. When you're raised to feel like you have to earn love, sometimes when somebody is secure and they have a secure attachment and they just want to love you because of who you are, it feels uncomfortable. Not only can it feel uncomfortable, but I've had people in my coaching practice tell me, Michele, sometimes it's boring. And a lot of that is because it's not because they're bad people, it's not because they love drama, but it's because there's a pattern. And patterns are familiar, and they're comfortable because of that familiarity. So that's another reason why some people wind up gravitating to people that are emotionally unavailable, because they feel like by working hard for it, by gaining it from this person that's really hard to get it from, it somehow makes it valuable, and it somehow ties into even the repetition compulsion and the old wounds. They all kind of tie together, but it becomes something that makes it hard for someone to feel comfortable being in a relationship with somebody that is secure and emotionally stable. And the last reason that I'm going to mention in this list, and again, it's not an all-inclusive list, but another reason why people tend to find themselves in relationships with emotionally unavailable people is because they tend to have a high tolerance to being treated that way. And again, it all goes back to childhood. It all goes back to what you were trained and conditioned in your childhood. If your role was to give and give and give and try to earn and do and try to get a tiny bit back, well then when you're in a relationship like that, once again, it feels familiar. Okay, so far we talked a little bit about some signs of emotionally unavailable people. We also talked about why some people find themselves in these patterns of relationships with people that are emotionally unavailable. Whether it's just emotionally unavailable up to malignant narcissists, they find themselves always in that realm. Here are a couple quick tips that can begin helping you even today. So the first thing is to validate your feelings and your perceptions. So interestingly, a lot of people have a difficult time validating their perception because as an adult, they realize and they fully know that their parent did their best. They fully understand what happened. The problem is, because of cell memory, the things that happened to us in our childhood, our body remembers it. Even though as the man or woman you are today, even though that person is healed, from that perspective, the child within is still carrying those wounds. So some of the ways that you can do that is by, thinking about your past, and you could bring up some memories and then validate them. Name the feelings that each memory brought up. Validate it by saying something like, well, of course that made me feel sad. Of course that hurt. I felt this or I thought that. Anyone would feel that way. So now you're normalizing your past emotions. The second tip is changing your inner dialogue. If you want to know how much you love yourself, or if you want to know how much you care about yourself, start listening to the things you say to yourself. And it's funny, what just popped into my head was, in regards to malignant narcissists, we always say, if you want to know what they think of themselves, right? Listen to what they say to you. Well, something similar is the same thing with us when it comes to how you feel about yourself. Pay attention to what you say to you, and you'll find out what you really feel about yourself. For example, I'll get some clients that say, no, Michele, I believe in myself and I love myself. Of course I love myself. And then when we're going over inner dialogue and they start looking at the things they say to themselves on a daily basis, a lot of times they're in shock. So start paying attention to the inner dialogue, and a lot of that is going on a subconscious level. It's like elevator music, where you're not really paying attention to it, but it's affecting you. I had a client recently, we were talking about this, and she gave this illustration. She's like, Michele, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was at work the other day, and I'm in the bathroom, and I'm singing this song, and I'm like, why am I singing this song? She said, then I went back to my office space, and sure enough, 5-10 feet away, that song was on the radio. She said, I didn't even realize that I was listening until I was, paying attention. Well, that happens with our inner dialogue. Start treating yourself the way you want others to treat you, because guess what? How we feel about ourselves, we're always projecting that out to other people, and they pick up on it. If our self-esteem is high, people can feel it. If we hate ourselves or we think we're less, people can feel that too. And who loves a person that has a low self-esteem, doesn't believe in themselves, that's battling shame? Malignant narcissists or emotionally unavailable people. So part of not attracting or not being attracted to them is changing our inner state so that we don't continue to attract that. Right? Because they say like attracts like. And when we're healing our emotional wounds, then we become more emotionally available. Because guess what? If we are in a relationship to try to heal our wounds, then we are not emotionally available. If I want to feel loved, and so therefore I'm in a relationship so that I can feel enough or I can feel loved, I'm not emotionally available. Someone that's emotionally available has those feelings inside already. And then the other person, together they enhance those emotions, but an emotionally available person isn't dependent on someone else to be able to generate that inside. So the more you become emotionally available, the less you will attract people that are not emotionally available. So I hope this video opens your eyes so that you can start breaking the cycle, breaking the pattern of one toxic relationship after another, so that you can find the relationship that makes you feel enough, loved, and valuable. And the truth is, the first person you need to feel that with is yourself.